women play a massive role in sexual selection, so that you're twice as likely to be a failure if you're a man than you are if you're a woman.
And so what the females seem to be doing is using some marker or some set of markers as a proxy indicator for health.
They are the force of nature that does the selection. So it is actually the case that female humans are nature.
And I'm so sick of people saying that love is just all a woman is fit for. I'm so sick of it.
There's something wrong with you because you're wrong. They're right to not pick you. If they're not picking you, it's because they're right.
I choose you. And whatever course you are charting, I choose you.
One of the things about human beings that's unique is that human females are picky maters. They're choosy. They're also sneaky because you can't tell when they're ovulating, and with many other female animals you know. So they have hidden ovulation and they're choosy, and they tend to choose men who are more successful in the dominance hierarchy. Well, there's a shock. I mean, if you have a choice, why not you pick someone who's at the bottom of the competence hierarchy? Well, that's probably not going to work out very well for you. And since women bear the burden of reproduction, it's perfectly reasonable for them to search out someone who's going to be helpful. So productive, fair, generous. And you know, when you think of a dominance hierarchy, you might think, well, it's the powerful guy, the aggressive guy, say, that rises to the top of the dominance hierarchy, and that's not true. You know, and it's certainly the case that female humans prefer creative men. So, and no wonder, of course, we wouldn't be creative if that wasn't the case. So then imagine that there's two primary forces of evolutionary selection operating on us, and they're not really the natural world, which is what people always think, like the environment, you know, the animals and the trees and nature. But it isn't nature that selected us. It's two other things. Well, partly. It's two other things. So one is the dominance hierarchy. The male dominance hierarchy is one of the primary mechanisms of selection. So it's like women are faced with a hard choice, which guy to go after, right? That's a hard choice. Well, so they do the same thing that people do with the stock market. They outsource the cognitive problem, the computational problem, to the male dominance hierarchy. Then they just let the males sort themselves out, however they're going to, and then they peel from the top. And so what that means is the male dominance hierarchy itself is a selection mechanism, because if you fail at it, then you don't leave any offspring. And so what that means, at least in part, is that we have adapted to be better and better at attaining status in dominance hierarchies over God only knows how long a period of time. And that doesn't mean just power. You know, it might mean cognitive flexibility, because you could imagine dominance hierarchy A, dominance hierarchy B, dominance hierarchy C. Okay, so if you're really successful, you climb up dominance hierarchy A. Right, but you'd B and C, no, if you happen to land in those, you'd just be a failure. So then you could say the ideal human being is someone who can climb to the top of a dominance hierarchy no matter what the dominance hierarchy is. Right, so we've evolved such that success across the set of possible dominance hierarchies is the target. And I think that's why we have general intelligence, because general intelligence is a general problem-solving mechanism. It's a single factor even, like intelligence is a single factor. It's not divisible. There's a funny study done by the guy who established one of the big dating sites, and he looked at how women rated men, and they rated the 50th percentile man at the 15th percentile. So 85% of men were below average according to women's ratings. Now men had their same arbitrary choices, because of course they preferred younger women to older women, and they were more swayed, I would say, by attractiveness, but that didn't have nearly as big an effect on their actual rating of women.
And so what the females seem to be doing is using some marker or some set of markers as a proxy indicator for health. And I think, and there's some of that vice versa too, like we evaluate each other, for example, for symmetry, which is one of the elements of beauty, because healthier people tend to be more symmetrical, and lots of animals use symmetry. If butterflies won't mate with another butterfly if it deviates from symmetry by the tiniest amounts you can imagine. So symmetry is a marker, and there's other markers like shoulder width to waist width is one, and waist width to hip width is another. That's usually what males use that to evaluate females in part. So there's lots of markers of health, but it also looks to me like the data worldwide seems to indicate that women, so imagine that Women mate across dominance hierarchies and up, socioeconomically speaking. And on average, across cultures, women go for men who are about 4 to 5 years older. You know, it varies. In the Scandinavian countries, that's shrunk a little bit, but not that much. And in other cultures, it's bigger. I would say that depends to some degree on difficulty of establishing economic independence, right? Because in richer countries, it's easier to have enough economic independence if you're a male to be a useful participant in the process of having children. But it doesn't matter, cross-culturally, it's still across and up, where men mate across and down. They don't care much about socioeconomic status. It doesn't seem to be part of their selection method, generally speaking. So I think that part of that is also the ability of women to select for male health. It's something like that, because it isn't only that, because if you're healthy and energetic, you're much more likely to be successful, because it's very hard to be successful if you're ill, obviously. I mean, so, because the competition is just too high. And both genders, both sexes select each other for attractiveness, both select for intelligence, both select for personality, although there are differences there in terms of what's stressed.
And then from the female perspective, females are the next gatekeeper, and that's why they're often Mother Nature. It took me a long time to figure this out. Why the hell is nature feminine? You know, nature is benevolent and it's fruitful. All things come from nature, and all things come from the unknown, right? Because the known is already there. It's the unknown that manifests the new, right? And so that's part of the reason for the characterization of the unknown as feminine. Anyway, so, you know, from a Darwinian perspective, nature is that which selects. That's all it is. And so sexual selection plays a massive role in human evolution. And then there's also the case that women play a massive role in sexual selection among human beings, so that from an evolutionary perspective, you're twice as likely to be a failure if you're a man than you are if you're a woman, in that you have twice as many female ancestors as male ancestors. And you think, well, that's impossible, but it's not. All you have to do is imagine that every woman has one child, half the men have 2 and the other half have 0, and so end of problem. And that's basically how it works out. So women are more choosy maters than men by a substantial margin.
I mean, we have that as a cognitive category, right? We think of the natural world, we think of nature versus culture. It's a fundamental opposition. What is nature? Well, nature is trees and landscapes and animals and all of that, but that isn't what nature fundamentally is. Nature fundamentally is that which selects from a genetic perspective. That's nature. That's the fundamental definition of nature. And it is the case that human females are sexually selective. And it's a major component of human behavior. So,
you know, the fact that we have these massive brains is very likely a consequence of a positive feedback loop in sexual selection. You know, because otherwise that's the only time you can get really rapid changes in evolutionary space, where, you know, you get a process going that reinforces itself. So there's a little preference for intelligence, and then that produces more intelligent men and women, and then there's a little more preference for intelligence, and, you know, maybe then that turns into the ability to speak and or to master fire, and then there's way more selection for intelligence, and the brain just goes.
So it is actually the case that female humans are nature. It's not only that they're associated with nature symbolically. As far as reproduction is concerned, they are the force of nature that does the selection. And so they're nature in the most fundamental way. And there is a chaotic element of that, at least in relationship to men, and also in relationship to women, because a lot of the female-on-female competition is competition that's chaotic for the right to be sexually selective, right? Not only with regards to men, which drives a lot of politicking, but also in relationship to each other, because part of what human females do is jockey for position in the female dominance hierarchy for the top position, which is the woman who gets to be most sexually selective. And so that drives female-female competition, and it's a different dynamic. There's similarities between female-female competition and male-male competition, but there are also differences, and they're pronounced.
And that's partly why far more men than you might think, like far more, are terrified of women. Because to be rejected as a romantic partner by a woman is to be classified as vaguely acceptable life form. No value in propagating it, though. Right, so it's a major, major rejection. And, you know, I've had dozens of clients, and many, many people write to me whose primary problem is that they're so terrified of women they can't even approach them. Very, very, very common.